two pieces in particular caught our eye. Ewan McKenna in the Business Post and Eamon Sweeney on the back page of the Sunday Independent. A theme maybe on the Conor McGregor coverage today and across the week is that it seems now we've gone from discussions over whether Conor McGregor is someone to be admired or not admired, whether he's a good representation of the country or not, and we've kind of segued into a discussion about Conor McGregor's future. And is this going to end badly for Conor McGregor in the most cliched of ways?
There's this kind of shadow being cast over, particularly in Ewan McKenna's piece, this whole notion that pride comes before a fall, and the idea of his fairly cavalier behaviour to his court date in Blanchardstown earlier in the week. And it's funny actually that the two pieces that we've picked out take a slightly different tack, because Eamon Sweeney, I think, is rare among what you might call, inverted commas, mainstream journalists, because I think it's the first time in a long time that somebody is asking that Conor McGregor be shown a little bit of latitude and for people to have a bit of patience with him, whereas Ewan seems to think that any patience would just be ill spent, because he seems to think that he's going to be careering off some terrible social curb where his life is going to go off the rails entirely.
Well, one line on Ewan's piece ties in with that point. He says, as McGregor run towards that cliff, those around him keep paying compliments as to just how fast he is.
Yeah, there was a particular line in it I liked as well, this idea that, he follows on from not just the court date earlier this week, but also his behaviour at the Grand National in Aintree, where people might remember that they saw him going around with a shirt that was completely unbuttoned down to the navel, and that night he left a nightclub with his hand cut. He left behind a trashed hotel suite without a care, as a luxury car company owner had to call him out after seeing photos of him on the bonnet of a rented Rolls Royce giving the finger. Ultimately, Ewan continues, McGregor took another selfie of himself on a private jet with a bag of cash, as if that made it okay. And I think this is the killer line. The Mayweather nonsense meant he had €100 million more to do damage with, and to bribe himself into thinking that it was all right.
Yeah.
Bribing himself into thinking that his kind of just ill behaviour or misdemeanours are in some way acceptable.
What they both have in common, Declan, both ask, so take Ewan's quotes here, and Eamon wonders the same thing, I think. So the Mayweather fight gives him 100 million. So what exactly is it McGregor does anymore? What's his purpose? Where's his direction? He says there's a reason lotto winners are told to keep working.
Yeah. I found the whole thing that, like, there was something missing in the thing. Like, he does everything in his power to get the 100 million, the sort of headline number, the absolute money for 25 lifetimes. So he gets there. And you kind of forget about him for a while. And the next time you hear him, he's in a pub in Crumlin. He did everything he could to get away from a pub in Crumlin, as such, the proverbial pub in Crumlin.
Yeah.
And the first thing you hear about him after a few other embarrassing episodes is that he seems to have, found something in a pub in Crumlin, which is, it's almost too cliched to even get your head around. There's some extraordinary little sidebars to it. Gavin, you might have seen David Davenpower, the former political correspondent, describing McGregor as someone who represents all that's wrong about society. For someone who has been a political correspondent and the kind of people he's been, close to all his working life, that's quite a statement. Yeah. He doesn't represent all that's wrong about society. You know what I mean? He's, he seems to have lost his kind of soul, though, in some way. You know what I mean? Like, I don't recognise the guy I knew 2 months ago. I saw him sort of apologising to Ryan Tubridy on the Late Late Show for something, and you're thinking, it was just wrong. I mean, he just seemed to have lost something along the way.
But he had to apologise for that, I think.
He did, but it was like, what is he doing? How did he get himself into that sort of space? And I think that's the kind of unanswered question about this, that there's, why has he found himself even in these situations? I mean, there's a lot of little gags about it. The Paul Reynolds and his, it's only a 1.5. Of course, what we should say about that is, if we conclude from that, is only RTE employees are able to look down on people's cars and know about them and be able to sort of make a judgment on that sort of aspect of it. But the thing about lotto winners being urged to work is very interesting, because I've sometimes felt this as well, that, like, what would happen if someone gave you 10 million quid. The thing everyone thinks is, oh, I'd go off somewhere sunny and just lie down for 20 years.
Yeah.
That would clearly drive you mad after about 3 days. It really does. I mean, there's nothing there. Like, in all these expats, these British expats in Spain, right? What a maddening way of life. There's no culture that they connect with. They just sit in this non-existence for 20 years, just burning up. And for anyone with any kind of mental activity still going on, there is a real point to that if you stop doing whatever you've been doing most of your life, some bad things can happen. Like, you know what I mean? You lose something essential, and a lot of these factors, I think, are building into this carry on.
I think that brings us back to a bigger question, though, about Conor McGregor's future, which both pieces kind of skirt around, which is that he has been the champion at 2 UFC weight divisions. He fought in an experimental boxing match, and you could talk till the cows come home about whether it was a justified sporting occasion or not. But the end of the reel is that he told a court this week he got 140 million quid for it. So he clearly doesn't need to work again. But McGregor has always shown, I think, even throughout his sporting career, a kind of an attitude that once he's reached the summit of one mountain, he has no real interest in trying to defend his perch. I mean, how many title defences has he mounted? He's mounted none in UFC. I don't know about Cage Warriors beforehand, but every time he wins a belt, then he stops fighting in that division. He hasn't defended the second belt that he won. The first one was taken off him from inactivity. So it kind of begs the question then, is that does he have another project in mind, or does he just intend to going around living a life of luxury? And you would worry to some degree that if he doesn't have another project, another goal to work towards, and if the goal is boxing, it has to be a fight that will earn him more than Mayweather did. And I don't know whether there is another task for him to focus on.
Yeah, it's like with someone like Beckham, who, due to being an extraordinarily intelligent person rather than the immensely stupid person that most people seem to regard him as, was able to kind of create this admittedly kind of deeply sort of superficial but highly kind of beneficial life for himself just by knowing how the world works. In the mind's eye with Conor McGregor, I did see him in some penthouse forever, because that was what he wanted to do.
Yes.
But it could be that like the story ended there and he simply doesn't know what the next bit is. Beckham did. Beckham has an example of I suppose, a successful sportsman who had to find something else to do with the rest of his life. And McGregor is in the same thing. He achieved everything he wanted, but didn't work out the next bit. So it's an
interesting point. Like Ewan says, for instance, for months photos and videos of madness rather than lawlessness have done the rounds, and whatever about no smoke without fire, the smoke alone has been choking chaos.
There is an interesting point actually in Ewan's piece, sorry to interrupt you, Joe, but that he talks about, he compares it, the incident at the 3 Arena a few weeks back, where at the Bellator event that McGregor jumped into a cage and accosted the referee, and he makes the comparison with what happened at the 2010 Leinster football final, where the 3 Louth fans ended up in court afterwards for what they did to the referee Martin Sludden, whereas Conor McGregor, who had no ambassadorial role, wasn't involved in any of the camps, he was simply in the 3 Arena effectively as a spectator, feels that he's perfectly entitled to jump into a ring and accost a referee, and he seems to be able to get away with it on the basis of solely an apology. And when you combine that with the image portrayed by him leaving the court earlier this week, where he had been in court for a speeding offence, a judge had to tell him twice to show up, and when he left the court he drove away without a seatbelt. It kind of does beg a question as to whether in fact his purposelessness kind of means that he now thinks that he might be above the law in some ways.
To my eye, he didn't drive away from the court slowly.
No. I think he was pushing the limits of the 50 kilometres an hour.
He was flirting with 50,
but the idea of this being like the great hard man, openly defying the rules of the road, the district court or whatever it is. I mean, it's so small time.
Yeah, it is. And actually, I mean, it's a point that you made, but in Eamon Sweeney's piece, the headline of which is "Can Conor live happily ever after?" He does, he makes a similar point to you, like the potential criminals he's been interacting with over the last while, not least in that pub, it seems. But Sweeney writes, the mention of these people probably underlines the extent to which some of the criticism of McGregor has been a little over the top. His rhetoric can be incendiary and insensitive, yet he's not actually harming anyone. And in a country where there's plenty of real bad guys, does it really make sense to describe the fighter as someone who represents all that is wrong about society, like David Davenport did last week? Surely there are better candidates for this honour, the monsters who brutalised those family in rural Limerick perhaps, or the sleazy conspirators behind the smear campaign against Maurice McCabe. I mean, what Sweeney ultimately is wondering is this guy going to be okay? And he does, like if we get into, so is like where it's hard to know how out of control McGregor is at the moment, because on the one hand you're seeing videos where he just looks like he is high on life, to say the least, and out of control, and he's got the hangers on, and it's just a mess. And then interestingly, his dad Tony was on the radio during the week, calming everything down, saying, look, the stuff which you've heard about Tuesday night is 95% exaggerated, and 95% untrue, and the other 5% unexaggerated. And he was asked, where's Conor now? Or what's the plan for the day? And it was, well, we're wrapping Christmas presents for Conor. He's Conor Jr., isn't he?
Conor Jr.,
Yeah. Wrapping Christmas presents for Conor Jr. And you kind of think, okay, that seems like a normal enough day. And you saw him on the Late Late Show. I don't know, did you see the interview on the Late Late Show? I thought he came across well. I thought he came across relatively okay and in control of things.
I
It's
think
just stuff is going on behind the scenes, it seems,
But I
when
think
the cameras aren't there, which isn't as good.
that's the point, though. I think that when he went to the Late Late, that there was a purpose to be served, because he had been caught on camera saying things that he ought not to have said, and he said, actually, you know what, hands up, fully responsible for that. I'm sorry for what I said, didn't mean it, I won't do it again.
Yeah.
There
No,
was a purpose to it, there was a mission to be achieved.
He was there to promote his movie, ultimately. Like, he had been meant to be there the week before, but cried off sick. And then was there, and it was a pre-recorded thing. So, like, he didn't go on specifically to apologise. That came up. He was there to promote the movie. He seemed aware of the important things in life, I would say. He understood fatherhood. He understood how wonderful it all was. He seemed to get, if I don't have my family with me, his broader family, then what's the point of all this? He seemed to be saying the right things. Admittedly, they're some of the most cliched things in the world you can say.
I think what he should do is he should get himself back to his gold-plated penthouse, wherever, and employ the finest therapists that all his money can buy, and live with them for a while, and be in that environment, because he just needs to get himself sorted out quickly, like anyone, So he has the money to do it. Like the finest of American head drinkers are at his disposal. So that's kind of clearly what he needs to do. And sorry, nothing against, but he needs to stay out of Crumlin for a while. And his it's the most basic thing about, like, your location. You know what I mean? He needs to be in a place where he's protected from the kind of things that he got into over the last while, and to do that, he needs to be all that money that these luxurious surroundings that he works so hard to achieve. So that basically he should do what rich people do in these situations. Buy the best of help, and then maybe he'll be okay.
I don't know if I'd hold it against him for living where he grew up, and I think that we just have this assumption that someone who's got a 9-figure bank balance ought to be living somewhere sunnier than Crumlin. But if that's his hometown, he wants to hang around there, I wouldn't hold that against him, and nor would I criticise.
No, it's not about living where it is, but being in pubs and getting into fights.
Yeah,
where
no, true.
The living is okay. It's the pubs and the fights that's the problem.
Nor would I hold it against him for enjoying his wealth, because even if you look at how many professional fights has he ever fought, but if you read John Kavanagh's book, it's quite eloquently stated that the guy's a damn hard worker, and he's perfectly entitled to feel like he's reached the top of the hill for accumulating the wealth that he has. I just hope that at some point over Christmas, New Year, that the penny kind of drops, that there isn't really a goal or a new project left to work on. Maybe the film carried him over for a bit because he knew he had promotional duties around that. But now the film is done. McGregor is forgotten. There's a UFC belt that he will presumably be expected to defend. Does he have an appetite to do that if the payday isn't as good as boxing promotion might be? I just hope that somewhere along the line in the downtime around Christmas that he realises, okay, I need a new goal to focus towards, and I think as long as he does that, I think he'll be okay.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll move on. On John Kavanagh, I think it will be a difficult but legitimate question for him to answer over the coming months. How do you feel about a fighter that you train getting into fights and using the expertise he has outside of the octagon? When the 14-year-old comes to your gym, which ultimately is John Kavanagh's bread and butter, and you say to that 14-year-old, the stuff we're working on here, it's for inside the octagon. It's not something I want to see you guys using in the pub. Well, Conor McGregor did.
Well, I agree to you, but I'm not entirely sure if that is John Kavanagh's ethos, because in the book he talks about how he was motivated into all of this because he was basically working at the doors of nightclubs and he was worried
true,
about
yeah.
trying to stand up for himself when he had smaller stature.
Okay.
So actually he was learning martial arts originally himself, not in a sporting context, but just to take care of himself.
That's true.
At his work. So I don't know whether he'd have that attitude or not. Oh, you could be right though. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what he has to say about it. It's a tricky one for him. I mean, like, how much do you want to criticize Conor
Yeah.
McGregor
Yeah.
when you're John Kavanagh?